Neelu and I have been planning this conversation for probably a year, and it was well worth the wait. I'm sure you're going to agree. The main theme of the conversation is self-advocacy. We talk about how it plays a role in burnout, but also how it plays a role in the success of organizations. We talk about how introverts and extroverts differ in speaking up for themselves and their ideas. And Neelu also gives us tips on how we can get better at self-advocacy. We explore the role of culture and cultural expectations in mental well-being, which is something we haven't looked at in the podcast before. Without spoiling everything that we're about to cover, I found it a fascinating conversation. We cover loads and loads of things, and Neelu's story is really relatable. She shares with us how she used to experience debilitating panic attacks. At one point, she says she thinks she was born burned out. So really relatable, and loads of tips to take away too. I hope you love this as much as I did. Hey there. Welcome to the Burnout Isn't Necessary podcast, where we delve into the world of stress, burnout, and the science behind it all. Over a decade ago, I faced burnout as a management consultant, experiencing an emptiness that I wouldn't wish on anyone. But here's the truth. My burnout wasn't necessary, and it's not necessary for you either. I'm Hannah Holden, and together with my amazing guests, we share our real-life experiences with stress and burnout. We explore the science behind stress, offering practical tips to help you navigate those challenging moments in life. Our goal? To empower you to prevent burnout from taking over your life. I am passionate about stress mastery and preventing burnout, and I am here to guide you to a more balanced, fulfilling life. So let's go. Burnout isn't necessary, and I'm here to show you why. I'm delighted to be able to introduce you today to Neelu Kaur. She is an author, a speaker, an exec leadership coach, a self-advocacy champion, and no doubt more. She teaches us on how to own and express our worth, leading to happier, healthier employees and more innovative and competitive organizations. Thank you so much for joining me, Neelu. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a long time in the making, so I'm excited to be here.
Yes. We've been talking about doing this for a while. Here we are. So if there's one thing that I know you for, it's self-advocacy. And you've even published a book called Be Your Own Cheerleader. And for anybody who's watching this or watching a clip, you can see in the background behind Neelu, there it is, the Be Your Own Cheerleader book. So I want to know a little about your journey. Have you always been your own cheerleader, or were there events that led you to realize that this was something important for you?
I wish I always was my own cheerleader. I think I sucked at it so much so that I kept getting downsized and I kept getting fired, and it became this repetitive thing for me. And I think my last downsizing in 2013, I realized that the people that still had their jobs, my colleagues that were still in their chairs, like they had their health benefits, they had their, cushy paychecks, like they actually knew how to talk about themselves. They knew how to interrupt to get their voice heard. They knew how to get credit for their work. And I just felt so unskilled in doing that. And I think at that moment, my last downsizing is when I realized like this is an issue and I have to dig into why it's so difficult for me to be my own advocate. And not just at work, personally as well. So it's been a journey for sure.
And so how do you go from being in that position to now really being an expert in self-advocacy? What did you do to achieve that transformation?
Yeah. So if you think about it, so that's like all the way in 2013, and now we're here today. And so since then, so I started my own business. I've been on the path of entrepreneurship. I've coached and trained thousands of employees from startups to Fortune 500 companies. And I started realizing when I was facilitating workshops and speaking that it wasn't just me. And then there was this common thread or common red threads that I was noticing that it was challenging for certain groups of people more so than other groups of people. And so it led me to dig even further. And I realized for me, it was being an immigrant or being raised by immigrants. And then I realized it's a cultural thing too. So then it led me to really dig into this concept of collective cultures and individualistic cultures. So North America is very individualistic, and collective cultures are Asian cultures, Latin cultures, African cultures. Like these cultures are very group based and very we based. And so in those cultures, you sort of keep your head down, you do great work, and you think, oh, the work's going to speak for itself. And that's not how it works in corporate America. And so for me, it was a very rude awakening that I felt when you keep getting downsized and you keep getting fired, you think there's something wrong with you. And I started questioning, like, am I smart? Am I like, what's wrong? Why is everyone else able to keep these jobs and I can't? And so it really affected my self-esteem. And I think over the years, as I was working with so many people, I realized, like, hey, this is not just you, Neelu. It's like, there's a lot of people that struggle. And so I started just collecting research, and it led me to Be Your Own Cheerleader, the book. But I do think that beyond those collective cultures, there's other folks that really struggle. You could be really extremely introverted. You know, I work a lot with people in tech and software engineers and product managers. Like they're really smart at what they do, and they're sort of subject matter experts. So they're just like, leave me alone. Let me just do what I do. And then you don't get recognized for your work, or even worse, someone takes credit for your work. And then there was also, I realized there's neurodivergent folks that have been conditioned to just not speak up or speak out because they just want to stay under the radar. And so then they're expected to sort of advocate for themselves, and it's challenging for them as well. So you don't have to just come from those collective cultures. You can just come from, you could be extremely introverted. You could be neurodivergent. You could be from different parts of the country even. And we can talk about how it is in the UK, but in the US, even smaller towns are more collective than bigger cities. And so in New York City, in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, it's very individualistic. It's very competitive. But if you go to middle of the country, it's not as individualistic. And so people operate differently. So it's not even an international thing. It can be sort of a domestic way you were raised in the towns you were raised in.
Yeah, I was interacting with somebody recently about things that you heard when you were younger, or things that you're told when you're younger, and how that shows up. And yeah, I remember being told not to rock the boat. So that for me was interpreted as I need to deal with my own stuff, and I need to keep a lid on it and not be talking about it. And so that would have played it. I know that there are times where I have been a great self-advocate, but there's a general consistent theme of not really being a great at that. Yeah. So
and I think that's so interesting, because you got that message. I got that message. The lens in which I got that message of don't rock the boat is because this isn't our country. So we just want to sort of stay under the radar. You don't want to draw too much attention to yourself, right? And then you think about it from being a woman, like in Indian culture, it's like, at least when I was being raised, my parents, it was like, don't rock the boat. We don't want to upset your dad. We just want to keep doing what we're doing. So there was all these different messages of don't rock the boat. And then you become an adult and you start your first job, and that's what you think is normal. You're like, I don't want to rock the boat. I just want to like blend in, if you will.
Yeah. So for me, that comment, I think it was intended to be a short-term thing. We've got a lot going on. Please try not to be a troublemaker during this time. But I took it to be a long-term thing of you should never be raising you. Just keep a lid on it. Just don't be the trouble. Don't be the source of trouble. We've got enough going on. And so, yeah, don't bring your problems to me, kind of thing. Sort them out yourself, which I don't think was intended by the adult that said it to me, well, by my mum.
Right.
So I think that she was just meaning like, today we've just got a lot going on, please I think that that's all she meant by it when I look back. But yeah, that's not quite how I interpreted it. I thought it was a long-term thing.
Yeah. And, and that goes back to like when we're children, we take everything in extremes, right? So you extrapolated that one, like those comments, to just be generalized to your whole life. And so we do that as children. And it's very common. So yes, I absolutely think things we were told, things we were modeled, behavior that was modeled to us, it might have been modeled in a short period of time. But then as children, we're like, wait, this is everything. This is how we need to be always. And so it kind of sticks with us.
Yeah. That's quite a broad range of people that you find yourself working with and specializing in. I think I read somewhere that you that you specifically focus on individuals from multicultural backgrounds, introverts, women, disabled, and neurodivergent people. I really love that group that you've defined as being people that you work with.
Well, interestingly, I never thought that that was my audience. It was really feedback after my book was published about how, because the book is through the lens of Asian and South Asian culture, like from this collective lens of dancing between the we and the I. But then when my book was published and I was sort of on this publicity circuit and the word was getting out, I got so many people messaging saying, actually, what you were talking about applies to me and I'm neurodivergent, or this applies to me and I'm disabled, or this applies to me. And I didn't realize that it was going to apply to people, but it's anyone really that struggles with speaking up, or you were just taught not to stick out. And that could be a variety of people.
So this podcast, as you know, is called Burnout Isn't Necessary. And my experience of being in burnout was that I was not really in a good place to advocate for myself. So the main reason for that was because I thought I was the problem. So I found myself in a situation where other members of the team had left. We had a shared area of expertise, and more of that work was coming to me because effectively there were 3 of us who had expertise in this area. The other 2 left. It all came to me. And I thought nobody would ask me to do a workload that was unmanageable and unreasonable. And therefore, they must be being reasonable and I must be unable to do something that a human being should be able to do, that I should be able to do. And so I'm probably the problem here. I don't want to raise awareness. Like, I don't want to be saying there's a problem because the problem's me. So I don't really want to start self-advocating. I did to a certain extent towards the end when I was saying that this is just unmanageable for me. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep working weekends. I can't, like, something has to change because it's just not manageable. But yeah, and I think I believe that this does apply to others in burnout because they get themselves to a point of confusion. Like, that was another reason why I didn't say very much, because I really didn't understand what was going on for me. And I felt like I'm an intelligent person and I ought to be able to explain what's going on to me to another intelligent person. And if I can't do that, then I must be the problem. Like, if I can't articulate it, then I'm the problem and I don't understand this, so I can't articulate it to others. So I didn't self-advocate very much when I was in burnout. And I'm interested in what your thoughts are on whether that's true for many people in burnout, or if you think that, like, and what would be your message to somebody who is in burnout? How does self-advocacy and burnout have a relationship?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like they're like sisters. Because what happens is and I think the common denominator under all of that is fear. So you are fearful that if you speak up, you're going to be perceived as not competent. And if you speak up and ask for help, you're going to be perceived as like you're too needy, and there's so many stereotypes too for women, specifically in certain industries. So it's like you're fearful of speaking up. And when you're fearful of speaking up, you're taking on so much work. And then before you know it, you're so overwhelmed, you're so exhausted. And that's a recipe for burnout. And so I think the message would probably be like, it's okay to speak up, find the allies in your organization that can listen to you, that can actually help you. But I think before we can even get to that place, it's really recognizing when we're burned out. And I think one of the telltale signs for me is when we're just so overwhelmed, we can't do anything.
Yeah.
Right. Like, we're just so overwhelmed. It's like paralysis of being able to do anything. And I think there's so many signs that you're heading in that direction. And the onus is on each one of us individually to figure out, okay, I feel like I'm heading into this path that I don't want to be on. And so who can I ask for support? What resources are there in the organization? Or if you're an entrepreneur, like where else can I get support? So I think one is identifying the burnout, and then second is asking for support. And I think that is self-advocacy.
I can also really see how self-advocacy can play a role in prevention, because I've talked before about how in burnout, we often start in this honeymoon phase, whether we've been promoted into a new job or we've just got a new job. And like we throw everything at it. We don't mind working weekends, taking calls out of hours. It's all fine because we're so enthusiastic. It's okay that we wake up in the middle of the night with all these ideas and start scribbling them down because it's all part of enthusiasm. But that's not sustainable. And then there comes a time where we realize that we want to rein it back in again. But now it feels like we've set expectations that with everybody that we do take calls on weekends, and then that's where it becomes really hard to establish different boundaries. And I think that self-advocacy could, like, if we were all better at self-advocacy, if we'd all probably read your book, then we would be able to reset those boundaries at that point, because that's where, you know, that's the sweet spot for preventing burnout, right there, where you realize that, okay, I'm not in the honeymoon period anymore. I want to set some new boundaries.
Yeah, I love that. I love that sort of metaphor of honeymoon phase. And I guess so question for you is, when you define it as a honeymoon phase, like, what's the time period that you think that enthusiasm is like healthy versus when it gets to a point where because there's a fine line, right?
Yeah. So it's a good question, timeline wise. And I would imagine it's different for different people.
Yeah.
Because some, especially entrepreneurs, they can stay in honeymoon period for a whole lot longer,
Right.
because their mission, their values, if it's all wrapped up in what they're doing, then they can continue to work extensive hours, like more than the rest of us, because it's all part of their passion, and they get fueled by doing the work. So there'll be some people who can continue like that for a whole lot longer. I think for me, it's probably in the 1 to 2 months mark, around there, where it goes from feeling really, really good to feeling like, okay, actually, no, this isn't entirely sustainable. I want to start changing some of those boundaries. I think for me, it would be in that region. But yeah, I would imagine it's different for different people.
Yeah, no, I love that. I never really thought through that. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about myself too. There are times when I'm working on something that's just so exciting to me that I will be up in the middle of the night and just, yeah. So I can see how that's not sustainable. That's absolutely not sustainable.
Yeah. Well, but it's so exciting to be in that flow
Yes,
state of
exactly.
it's great to enjoy it while it lasts, but recognize that it's not sustainable, and hopefully don't set expectations with everybody around you that that's how it's going to be.
There's one question that I ask when I get to that place where I'm just so overwhelmed, where I have so many things on my plate and I don't know what to do next. I think one of the things I will ask myself, and in Burnout, we talk about this, is basically to pause, but I think pause and ask yourself, like, what do I need in this moment? 'Cause, ultimately we know the answers to what we need. And I think once we listen to what we need, we can then say, okay, you know what? I need to take a mental health day, or I need to take a walk around the block, recalibrate and come back and start over. So I really think the way self-advocacy and burnout, I think it's a two-pronged approach. First is identifying that you're going down this path. And the second is to ask yourself and then others who can, like, what support you can get. Because there's so much support out there. It's just figuring out what exactly that you need.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect of self-advocacy, to just recognize that you have the answers and ask yourself what you need. Yeah. Interesting. So in our email exchange before we recorded this, you mentioned that you have a personal experience of burnout. And one of the reasons that I created this podcast was to share real life experiences of burnout with people, because I think the greater the variety of experiences that we can expose someone to, the more likely they are to spot, oh, that's me. And there'll be elements of my story that resonate with somebody, and elements of others' stories that resonate with somebody. So based on the fact that you've also experienced burnout, I think I'd be really grateful if you could share some of that experience with the audience.
It's funny, Hannah. I think I was born burned out. No, I really believe that, because I feel like burnout, there's micro burnout and macro burnout. And I think for me, I'm a highly motivated overachiever. So I actually feel like I have micro burnout moments all the time. And I just have tools in my toolkit to identify what I need to do. Like yesterday, I took a mental health day. I did not do any work. And I hung out with a friend and I spent the whole day away from my computer because I was so overwhelmed from everything that I've had going on. And so that, to me, Monday night when I was feeling so heavy and fatigued was like, okay, that, Neelu, this is micro burnout. You need to do something about it. But I think macro burnout for me was really all of those downsizings and firings. It's like every time that would happen, because I was the person that was like, I had my head down, I was doing good work, I wasn't self-advocating. And I think that was what led me to those macro burnout moments. And I think if you sort of think of it through the lens of micro burnout and macro burnout, it's like we can take small steps every day to learn what we can do when we have those micro burnout moments and when we have macro burnout moments, right? So it's like a muscle we're flexing. So for me, it was like, okay, I need to take a mental health day. And let's say there was a macro burnout moment where it's like, okay, I just got fired or I got downsized. It's like, okay, well, maybe now I need to take a month of just recalibrating. And again, that's not a sustainable model because we can't spend months at a time doing that. But again, it really depends on, I think the way I identified it is like, is it a micro burnout moment or is it a macro burnout moment? And I think the more tools you can have in your toolkit is really helpful. And it's really about knowing yourself and what you need in the moment.
Yeah. And I love your reference to tools. And so, yeah, I've shared tips and hints on the podcast before, like the physiological sigh. That's a great one. Other breathing techniques, so powerful. Do you have any specific tips or tools in your toolkit that you could share?
You know, they're so simple, but they're all rooted in Ayurveda or yoga, which is basically that, you know, the first thing is when we're overwhelmed, when we're just feeling so mentally fatigued, it's like returning to the present moment is the most impactful thing. It's like a quick reset. And so using your five senses, like one of the things, and you know, you can say, I'm going to just ground my feet, to take my shoes off and ground my feet to wherever you are. And that's the sense of touch. Or, you know, you might be really focused on scent because that's one of my strongest senses. And so you might have a candle burning and you just focus on the scent of that candle, right? So it's really like getting back to the present moment. And then I go back to the question, what do I need in this moment? And I think the combination of returning to the present moment and asking yourself for the answer, it's like you don't need anyone else. You don't need support at that moment. You really just need to tap within the wellspring of knowledge that we all have. And I think the other tool that's been so helpful for me is to not reach for my phone first thing in the morning, which is so easy to do. But what happens is when you reach for the phone, it's like you're training your brain to be reactive and distracted all day because you're going to start replying to things. And for me, easing into the morning is really important. That really sets the tone for the day. And that's a basic principle in morning routines through Ayurveda, which is a holistic healing system based in India. But it's like the way you start your day is really going to set the tone for the day. And so starting your day without the phone is really helpful for me. And I think just easing in because we're in this hustle culture. And I think any way we can ease into anything is probably the best way to ease in.
I know somebody who uses their phone as an alarm clock and puts it underneath their pillow.
Oh gosh.
What a way to wake up. Can you imagine? Like,
instant
vibrating under your pillow, and then you've got like Facebook and everything else in your face first thing in the morning.
Oh my gosh. That's like instant cortisol. Like that is an alarm to your whole nervous system. But you know, I'm not a morning person, so it takes a lot for me to wake up, if you will. So I understand that person, like why they may do that, because they may need to be up at a particular time. But again, that's just sending such a cortisol like release to your body and your nervous system. I wonder how that person's day goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good question. Good question. I'll take that back to her. I get approached multiple times a week by people telling me how they could help me improve the podcast. They talk about improving the audio quality, improving the editing quality, improving the listening experience, and also improving the listener numbers. And this feedback all sounds fantastic. So I'm now looking to raise funds to make some of these improvements, which is why I'm introducing some affiliate brands to the podcast. When you buy from these brands, I will receive a commission, and my intention is to directly invest that back into the podcast to make those improvements. So today, I would like to introduce a brand called Ecotex. As you will know from listening to this podcast, I am a yoga practitioner, a teacher, a yoga enthusiast, and Ecotex, which is spelled Ekotex, is a brand that is dedicated to creating naturally beautiful, ethical, and durable yoga equipment. So, yoga mats and yoga props. And they're based in Scotland. They design their products to support you as the practitioner and also to support the planet in the process. And they now make a lot of their products locally in the UK, and if not, then in Europe. I use their equipment in my personal practice and also when I'm teaching. I think they offer fantastic value for money and great quality. And of course, also the peace of mind that these are eco friendly products. So, if you're interested in getting yoga equipment, I highly recommend them. And you can check out their products by clicking the link that I've included in the show notes. If you've got questions like whether or not you should be using a block for something or a bolster for something, then I am more than happy to help you with any questions that you have. So just drop me an email and maybe put something like yoga equipment in the title, and I'll get back to you with my guidance. So thank you for your support with this. Thank you for supporting the podcast. I hope that you love the Ecotex products as much as I do. And now let's get back to the conversation. So you've mentioned a couple of times already about cultural expectations and how culture plays a role in certainly in your experience in terms of self-advocacy. But I was wondering if you had thoughts on how cultural expectations play a role in mental well-being generally, and perhaps even in burnout specifically.
I think there's certain, like, I cannot speak about all collective cultures, but I can speak about South Asian culture. And the thing is, there's a still, I think, even though we've progressed and there's more freedom for women, I still think there's just such an expectation that women do much more at home, and also they're doing much more at work, right? So it's like, again, it comes down to self-advocacy, speaking up when you need help. And this doesn't just apply in performance review conversations. This is at home too. If you are taking on so much because there's so many cultural expectations of, like, well, you're the woman, you should cook and you should make sure the home is ready for your family and all of these things. I think there's some underlying cultural expectations that make it so much more challenging for women. And I've talked to so many women, and I know it's just not South Asian culture. I think women in general, we tend to want to make sure everything's great at home, and then we're doing that to ourselves at work as well. And it's a lot to do on your own.
Yeah. So definitely it's broader than just the South Asian culture. Definitely. And I think that a lot of the times women are creating it for themselves. But if I think about my friends who come from a South Asian background, the difference is the parents saying, you should be a good wife. You should be doing this. You should be doing that. Now, I don't get that from my parents, and I don't know of other friends who are from my cultural background getting that from parents. So there's kind of a cultural implied, like we do it to ourselves, that we think we should be everything. We should be the best mother. We should be making sure that the house is clean and cooking and like we do that to ourselves. And obviously there's been a cultural influence as little girls are brought up playing with their teacups and whatever. There's been something there that's been encouraged, but there's certainly nothing as explicit as having the mother-in-law saying, why are you not ironing, my son's whatever.
Right. Absolutely. And I think it's, when you think of collective cultures that are very group based, there's also this like added layer of multi-generations that could be in the same home as well. Right. And especially as we get older, we have aging parents. And so in collective cultures, typically, you take care of your aging parents. And so they may be in the home with you, in which case, then yes, there's all of these external, sources of feedback that you're getting regularly, and it can get overwhelming. And so I know from women that I've worked with that it is, if they're in this joint family situation, it's an added layer. But even if you're not in the joint family situation, it's just that the collective cultures, there's much more group inputs from so many different people. And so it can add to that expectation
Mm,
and pressure that you feel as a
mm,
wife, as a mother, as whatever role that you play.
yeah, really interesting. Really glad that we touched on that. So, I wanted to talk to you about a different aspect of being your own cheerleader, so when I hear be your own cheerleader, it seems very much focused on the individual and the individual's success and the individual's needs. And yet I know that you also do team building and you go and you work within organizations. And I kind of think that perhaps within organizations there's a little bit more encouragement to keep your head down, but then you've had your experiences of being the one that kept their head down and then being the one that got let go. So to me it just, there's something in there that feels a little bit like maybe they're two sides to the same coin, the success of the organization and the success of the individual, but they also sometimes feel like there's something that's not quite, like slightly opposing. And I was just wondering, how do you integrate them? Maybe they are one and the same thing and I'm kind of missing that, and they are integrated and they are complementary. But yeah, I just wanted your thoughts on that.
I love that you asked this, because I'm like, my whole effort right now is going in this direction, which is, so organizations will be more profitable, they will be more innovative. And with the current climate that we're in with AI and all of these like rapid technological changes, if you're not constantly innovating as an organization, you will not be able to stay in business, right? And so when you do not have cheerleaders in companies, they won't share their ideas, they won't get credit for their work, and they're not sort of bringing their ideas to the surface. If you're expecting them to operate just like keep your head down, just stay in all of these meetings, because the average employee spends 31 hours a month in meetings, the idea is that there's no time to create and innovate, right? So when I'm going into organizations, I'm actually helping them think through not just self-advocacy training, but also how do we create this culture of innovation through these individuals? Like, we have to empower them to speak up, and we have to allot them time to have the time to do deep work, which they don't do right now. I mean, we are in a Zoom or Teams or Google Meet, whatever, sort of that's the mode of operation. And you are in these meetings back to back with no time to process or synthesize information. So I think when we think about being your own cheerleader from an organizational perspective, it's really looking at innovation, and you will miss out on innovation if you don't have cheerleaders that are bringing their ideas and their ideas for new shiny objects, because that is what we need right now. We are in this
Yeah.
exponential age of change. And
Mm.
so if these people in your organization are just operating on autopilot or as robots, you're not going to survive as a company.
Yeah, that's you've made some really fantastic points in there, because AI is going to, like, it is reducing our need to repeat the same decisions. Like, AI can learn from us, where we say, here are the rules. When this goes wrong, you do this. When it goes like this, you do that. And so it can learn from us, but it can't innovate.
Right.
It can regurgitate stuff that humans have done before, but it's not going to be truly innovative. And so whilst people are concerned about where are the roles for human beings in the world of AI, the role for the human being has to be this creation of new ideas, this innovation. And so in order to put people into that space where they can be innovators, you are 100% right. They need to not be in their stress response. They need to have space and time. And that's the only way that they are going to be able to be creative. And so, as you say, for the future facing organization, that's the environment you need your people to be in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think individuality drives innovation. And it sounds not it's anti what currently exists, because everyone thinks collaboration is the way to go. And yes, we need that for certain things. We need that for operations. We need that for keeping things moving. But when we need innovation to compete and to stay in business, you have to allow people to advocate for themselves, to share their ideas, to speak up. Many people, especially in tech, because I work so much in tech, a lot of the engineers I work with, they have the brilliant ideas and they get overwhelmed in meetings that have 100 people in there and they don't know how to share their ideas. And so you need cheerleaders in order to have innovation.
Yeah. And you need to think about how do you create like idea capture processes that work for the introverts as well as they work for the extroverts, because otherwise it's only the extroverts that are going to get the voice in the room. If those scenarios are only set up where you've got 100 people in the room, you're just not going to get introverts putting their hand up, because the extroverts will take the full hour allotted and the introverts will walk away and say, maybe I'll talk about it next time.
Exactly. And then going a step further, there's someone else who might be the loudest voice in the room and they take credit for that introvert's idea. And then you've basically, diminished the motivation of that innovative thinker. And so then he or she is not going to offer those ideas. So you're basically stunting that creative wellspring, right? Like, so it is definitely not just individuals speaking up, it's organizations realizing that if you don't empower your people to speak up, you will not be able to compete.
Yeah, that's another really interesting area that we've covered. So you have such a diverse set of modalities that you work with. So you've got a degree in business, you've got a master's in social and organizational psychology, you are a NLP, and for anybody who doesn't know, that's neuro-linguistic programming coach. You're a yoga instructor, an Ayurveda specialist, and you're a trained, and I'm going to admit that I don't really know what this means, Ericksonian hypnotherapist. I know what hypnotherapy is.
Yes.
That's a broad and diverse set of modalities that you work with. Do you work with people as an NLP coach or as a yoga instructor or as an Ayurvedic specialist, or do you have a way that you're able to bring all of that together and use that kind of holistically, whether that be with individuals or organizations? How do you work with those modalities?
It's so funny. It's like when I hear it that way, it sounds so like disparate, right? Like it said there are all these things. However, so I used to have debilitating panic attacks and I was determined to figure out modalities that would work for me. And so these were the ones that worked for me. And so now when I think about the toolkit that I've created and continue to create, it's like I teach yoga in my community as something that is a way for me to give back, right? Like it's very meaningful to me. And so yoga has always been, I wouldn't say always, I would say the last 15 years, it has been like a big toolkit for me and also a way for me to give back. So that is always sort of there. And I think the other modes, what happens to me is I think of it two ways. One is organizationally and one is individually. So organizationally, I do a lot of keynotes, I do workshops, in which case, the way I deliver information will have principles of NLP. Now, will it be overt to the people in the audience? Maybe or maybe not. And versus when you're working with individuals, then I can bring on more like actual tangible strategies that NLP offers where you're working one-on-one with a client. So I think I believe for me, the modalities, really the way I intertwine them depend on if I'm working with a team or if I'm working with an individual. And it varies, right? And for me, with NLP, actually, many people don't know this, but the language that you use and some of the strategies for NLP come from Erickson. And so a lot of people think hypnotherapy is when you're in a trance, and that is true, yes, but there's also language that we can borrow from hypnotherapy that help us engage with an audience, to build rapport with an audience, to influence, right? If I want people to walk away thinking that individuality actually helps innovation, there's certain language that I will use in order to convey that message, right? And then if I'm working with an individual, it's like, okay, let's work on your internal dialogue that you're having with yourself, which is also an NLP strategy.
Interesting. I found your comments on, so I've used hypnotherapy and I found it to be really powerful. And I've also, so when I was preparing for workshops recently, I watched a whole bunch of different people running workshops and learning from them. And I found it really interesting how so many of them set an intention at the beginning saying, this is what you're going to get from this. You're going to get all of these benefits. You're going to feel like this by the end. And they're kind of planting this seed in the audience, and the audience hears that and consciously or subconsciously, it's like, oh, I'm going to feel like this by the end. Oh, I'm going to learn this. And then it plays out. And I think that's so interesting that they can, and that's, we're completely conscious. We're not, and I say conscious, I know that you're conscious when you're hypnotized, but you as you are any other time of the day when you attend a workshop, and yet they're able to kind of plant these little seeds that then,
those seeds presuppose that you're going to experience XYZ. And you can use those seeds in a keynote. It doesn't have to be people in a trance, right? You're just using the language that helps people feel like they're going to walk away with a new set of tools, a set of skills, right? So these language patterns that we learn in hypnotherapy can be used anywhere. You don't have to be in a trance. It's basically dialogue in a relaxed state, but you can use that with yourself as well.
So interesting. So I wanted to know, so if we bring all of that together, do you have what's your message for the world?
My message for the world, specifically, I would say, I mean, I think it applies to everyone, but I definitely think it applies to women, is advocate everywhere you can. So, a lot of the things that I talk about in my book and what I talk about in keynotes, it's through the lens of work. But I know as a South Asian woman, it's like, we can't just be one thing in one place. We take ourselves wherever we go, right? And so the idea is that if you are struggling with self-advocating at work, you're likely struggling to self-advocate at home. So practice where it feels comfortable. Like, maybe, I know for me, even saying to my husband sometimes, I don't want to go for pizza, I want to go to Thai food. Like, it's just saying that I want something different. I am going to rock the boat because I was programmed and conditioned to not rock the boat in any way. So even that small step of saying something that I want at home actually translate. It's a muscle you're flexing. So you can take that same skill set and do that at work in a different context, obviously. But the idea is that practice everywhere, because once you practice at work, you practice at home, you become your own cheerleader. And we need to be our own cheerleader with our health as well. When you're at the doctor's office and they're telling you that you need to do this, but you don't believe that's the case, so advocate for yourself. So it's like, we want this muscle not just to be at work, we want it to be in all parts of our life.
I think that 100% agree that if we find ways to practice, that will begin to become natural. So the more that we practice something, then suddenly we find it natural. And I think it's one of the core concepts of yoga, that we create a sacred space on our yoga mat where we practice, and especially the style of yoga that I practice, some of it's challenging, and it's intentionally challenging. It's intentionally there to get under your skin. And so the style of yoga that I'm talking about is Kundalini, and they like to lay us, so you'll be in a challenging physical position, and then you add on a specific breath, and then you might add on a specific place for you to place your eyes, and all together this is quite challenging. It feels irritating, it feels uncomfortable in the body, and they do this intentionally because then you get to experience discomfort on your mat in your safe space. How are you dealing with that? Are you giving up? Are you going to be like, well, everybody else can do this for 2 minutes, but I'm done? And you're just going to sit there being grumpy? Are you what's your internal dialogue? And I find it so interesting to watch my internal dialogue when I practice. And when I begin to get a bit irritated with something, I just smile to myself now. When something's oh, how long are we going to be in this pose for?
Right.
But the point that I was trying to make was that in yoga, one of the key things that we do is create a space to practice. We practice mindfulness, we practice being challenged, and we observe ourselves through that. And the more that we can practice that on the mat, the easier it is to then bring that into everyday life. And the same is true for what you're saying. You're saying practice self-advocacy anywhere you can, and start where it feels easier with the people that it feels easier, and build up from there, so that at some point you're going to be ready to do it, even in the hardest of environments that you face in your life. And I'm 100% agree with what you've just described.
Yeah, I think it's so important for all of us, but I think women specifically, because we're conditioned in different ways to sort of stay under the radar, and we have to advocate for ourselves. Yeah.
So we've talked we've probably talked quite a bit in terms of the content of the book, but we haven't explicitly told people what they can expect from the book. So what can people expect to get from your book?
So, when I think about Be Your Own Cheerleader, it's divided into 3 sections: cultural, psychological, and spiritual. And I think those 3 embody me and sort of the path I've been on. And so after every bit of research, there's some case studies, anecdotes, but there's also a practice, and I call it deliberate practice, that you can do with yourself. And so it's not just, reading something and not actually practicing. There's actual practice after every chapter so that you can learn the skills of self-advocacy. And I think that is one thing for me. It's like I love being inspired, but I also like to know how to go about how to shift, how do I be the next day after that session's over. And I think when I was writing the book, I really wanted to give tangible skills for people after they read the story or the anecdote or the research to then say, okay, how can I apply this to my life?
Yeah, I think that's really important, because it's so easy to consume information and then it just basically wash over you, because if you haven't figured out how to then make it implementable, it's of no use. It's just more noise to travel through your brain along with all the other noise that you've got. So that sounds really helpful and very powerful. So before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to share with listeners?
I think we've covered so much. I would say the last thing I would say is, being your own cheerleader, again, it's not just about doing it in one setting, it's doing it in all settings. And so just practice where you can practice.
Yeah. I think that's a very powerful approach, as I've just described. All right. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Hannah.
If you want to connect with Neelu, she's on LinkedIn and Instagram. I'll include the links in the show notes. I'll also include a link to Amazon, should you be interested in grabbing her book, which is Be Your Own Cheerleader. And her website is www.neelukaur.com. And I'm going to spell that for you. So www.neelukaur.com. All right, that's it. Thank you. Thank you for being part of Burnout Isn't Necessary. Our aim is to assist you in navigating stress and preventing burnout. If you found our conversations valuable, please consider subscribing and taking a moment to rate the podcast. Your feedback is essential. I want to hear from you. If you have questions or ideas for future episodes, share them with me. Your input can shape the content that we create. A common question I receive is where to start in managing stress, and everything starts with awareness. Stress impacts each of us in a unique way, and some stress symptoms can seem a little random, so I've created a checklist of symptoms to help you better understand how stress shows up for you. There's a link in the show notes. And a quick reminder, this podcast is presented for educational and entertainment purposes only. It's not a substitute for professional advice. Stay tuned for more episodes, and until next time, take care of yourself.